All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Matthew. I'm from xarmors.com, your host. And I'm glad today to welcome Alex Coulombe online. Hello, Alex.
Hello, Matthew.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
It's a nice screen behind you.
Yes. Yeah, everyone thinks that I'm just in the middle of doing something exciting, but there's just so many uses for a green screen these days. I found it was easier to just cover my wall this way. And, this is just my
Sure.
office now.
I'm surprised not to get your avatar directly
Yeah,
as your
we'll get there. Soon I will
eventually.
no longer exist in physical form at all.
As we discussed just a few seconds ago, I'm glad to talk to you because you're quite somewhere online on Twitter and social media and stuff like that. And it's really glad before the end of the year to just have a nice chat about everything and your project as well. Uh, my first question is usually, how did you end up working on immersive in the immersive industry?
Great question. So I studied architecture and theater at Syracuse University in upstate New York from 2005 to 2010. My thesis was creating a giant theater out of Fort Jay on Governor's Island, a little bit south of New York City, and I needed a way to convey the magnitude and the insanity of what I was planning for this theater, which was kind of an early conception of what would later become called immersive theater, or at least, I'm sure it was called immersive theater before then. I just wasn't familiar with it. But this idea of putting an audience in the middle of kind of acting happening all around them. And this was at this kind of very large spectacle scale. And so I found that with my traditional modeling tools that I had in architecture, I couldn't quite convey that well enough. So I found an early form of augmented reality, just using a webcam and like markers in 2009 and 2010 that I used to really help convey my thesis. But then once I started working at actual architecture firms, I was trying very hard to convince them that there was a lot of value in using these tools like augmented reality and real-time technologies. I was using early game engine things, like there was one called Quest 3D and one called Aspirient. This is before like Unreal Engine and Unity were more accessible. And I couldn't find architecture firms that wanted to use these in ways that I saw a lot of potential for, because I was always thinking about how for architecture, you really need to know what it feels like to move through a space, not just to see screenshots, and to have that sense of like compression and release and how light and shadow and color changes. And I just found those tools really compelling. And it wasn't until 2013 when the Oculus DK1 came out where I was like, oh my goodness, like I saw the Kickstarter video and it's like, this is something amazing we could really use to help convey the feeling of what it's actually like to be in a space before it's designed. So I had this before and after with VR in particular, where I remember sitting in meetings and we'd be trying to convey, and this is when I was working for Fisher Dax Associates, which is now a sister company of Agile Lens, my current company, bridging into my new company, Heaven U. Fisher Dax Associates designs theaters all over the world. And I started working for them in 2012. And I remember before we started using VR, we would sit in a meeting and I found so much time was passing where I was just trying to convey spatial representation of something. I'd be showing someone like a render and be like, look, this is what it'll be like to be in this new theater we're designing. And someone might look at a picture of like a seat, row Q, seat 13, and they'd say like, well, geez, the stage looks really far away. And I'd be like, no, I mean, the stage is 40 feet away. It's not that far. It's pretty normal. Or they'd say like, I feel like the head in front of that seat is really close. Isn't that going to be uncomfortable? And I'd be like, no, the head's 3 feet away. It's a standard row depth. And we just go through circles of all these questions where like, I basically just wanted to say like, you need to trust us. Like we know what we're doing. And this isn't the meat of the conversation we want to get to. And then the moment we started showing how this all worked in virtual reality, it immediately became like, oh, well, this is what it's like to sit in the seat and be in the space. Great. And then the discussions became much more nuanced and about like, well, I kind of like the curvature of the railing right here, but do you think we could push that in a little bit and change this angle? And it was like, yes, this is like the meat of the design discussion that I always wanted to be having. So was immediately thrilled by what happened when we started to bring that into our meetings.
And from that, the evolution of real-time technologies, it's amazing. how do you feel about the last, maybe, I don't know, what, last year, last 2 years, maybe, around softwares and technologies?
What's most remarkable to me is how much easier it's constantly becoming to be self-taught in all this. With tools like Unity and Unreal Engine now, which are very accessible. There's great communities, great tutorials, and then the barrier to entry for how much VR equipment costs, and the pipeline for getting something to work. Like even just the difference between Quest 1 and Quest 2 and what that pipeline was like to get an APK file sideloaded onto a Quest 1, where that was in 2019 compared to where that is now. That process has already improved so much. And so it's becoming really exciting, because I'm also a teacher, to see how much faster I can get people up on their feet, learning how to create compelling immersive experiences, where it becomes less and less of a technical challenge. And it's more just like, what's your idea? What's the thing you want to do with this technology? And then just like, how you might tell someone like, oh, this sounds like you want to make a painting, or that sounds like that wants to be a video game or a book. It just becomes like, this just seems like the right medium for your idea. And then there's fewer and fewer steps to actually getting from that idea to something that people can actually experience and be a part of.
Hey, how do you start a project, basically? You get all these technologies, ideas in mind, I guess, but is there any limits, boundaries you have? You have some.
Yeah, boundaries is a great word. So people talk a lot about in architecture, of course, there's all these boundaries and limitations and budgets regarding, the cost per square foot, or meter, depending on where you are, and how you deal with context, and how you deal with light and shadow, and all these things that are restrictions of physics in the real world. And a lot of people say, because I love the world of virtual architecture, designing my own virtual architecture and exploring it from others, and seeing who's taking advantage of the space really well. A lot of people talk about like, hey, isn't it weird though to try to design in a space where there is no boundaries and there are no limits? And it's like, well, that's not the case at all. When you're thinking about conceptualizing virtual architecture or any VR or AR project, there's still boundaries and limits. They're just different. So instead of saying like, well, we only have $100 to spend per square foot here, it might be like, well, based on the hardware we're targeting, maybe it's something like a Quest or a Vive Focus 3 or something standalone. You might be saying like, well, we can only budget 1,000 polygons per square foot or something like that. So there's just different kinds of budgets and different kinds of limitations. So in the way that it might be very easy in real world architecture to have like a very ornate sculptural facade, because you just need to hire the right talented stoneworkers and that sort of thing. Like that's much harder to do in VR, because suddenly you need everyone who's going to be experiencing that to have the right hardware to render that. Not to mention that because there are things you can do in virtual space that you can't do in the real world, I think it means that there's people making a lot of choices that aren't guided by architectural psychology, some of these elements that come from our reptile brains back when we were, living in the savannah or trying to hide in caves, that are fundamental to how we design real world architecture. One example is a lot of virtual experiences. They'll just drop you suddenly in the middle of a space, and you're just like, oh wow, I guess this is social because there's people here now, and it's very jarring sometimes. And like that doesn't happen in the real world. If you suddenly were to find yourself like in a room and there's people moving around you, I mean, you either have amnesia or you're kidnapped, neither of which would be good experiences. So, like with architecture, that procession of going from like a street into a lobby or a foyer and then into, let's say, a theater or something like that. Like there's something very important about that ritual and the experience of what the right behavior is and what behavior is encouraged, and the spatial experience of, again, moving through those spaces. And there's a lot of very excited hobbyists working in places like VR Chat, for example, nowadays, who it's great how passionate they are, but like they haven't taken the time to learn the craft of space making. So, it's this interesting balance where like I want to encourage everyone to go out and try everything and see what they like, but I also want them to study their craft and get better and learn the fundamentals. Picasso is a great example of someone who always said, like, you need to learn the rules before you can break them. Otherwise, it's just a lot of broken things that don't serve much. I added that last part, but as someone who like started out painting very realistically and then became more and more abstract as he went on, great example of someone who like learned how painting worked and then decided like, oh, I don't need this rule, I don't need this rule, I don't need this one.
Yeah, but when we talk about VR chat or the metaverse thing, other things are the rules. We are creating the rules while we are trying to create content. That's the research and development thing. That's an excuse every time to say our project is not finalized. It's not. We don't have the final one because we're still looking for the right words to tell it. Is that frustrating for you, or it's just a total liberty of things to create new stories, new environment, new worlds, new VR worlds?
I'm very rarely truly frustrated in this world because I'm so grateful for how quick we can iterate. Usually I'm very, very frustrated by the limitations of the real world and things related to bureaucracy and budgets and all the different approvals and stamps of approval that everything needs. And the fact that we can create something in virtual reality, like I can have an idea right now, and by this afternoon, I could be showing it to my children or my wife because they're the people immediately around me, but also I could send it online and have a whole host of other people checking it out. And that's something that just wasn't possible before. So I'll take the crashes and the things that go wrong and the other limitations that crop up very gladly, knowing that this is something that's totally unprecedented and something that I have remarkable gratitude for from both a creative perspective and a functional one. We get to create experiences that have utility, whether there's like a training application or it's a way for people to connect that haven't been able to see each other in the real world for the past couple of years, and I think that's wonderful and remarkable.
And between architectures and AI and stuff like that, are we trying to copy the real world, or are we going to create a new one? That's a big question.
Yeah, we have to create a new one. So I love this term skeuomorphism of like, replicating things in the real world because that's where the familiarity is. What I just mentioned a minute ago about that procession of moving into a theater, like there's a very understood ritual of how that works. And in some cases, like I'm sure we'll talk about the show Christmas Carol coming up next week, like there's some value in replicating certain things from the real world because it makes sense to people. Like people know that during a theater show, you should be quiet, you should listen and pay attention to the actors. But when you're in a virtual world, there's other things that don't make as much sense. Doesn't make as much sense in a theater show in the real world to tell the audience to stay seated in one spot and never change their perspective. If they can all be smaller than they are in the real world, and if they can fly, and if they can move around to scale very far down and get up close to an actor's face and see all the nuances of their expression, why shouldn't they do that and take advantage of the affordances of these new mediums? The tricky thing is doing that in a way where people don't feel too overwhelmed or lost. So I'm sure just like cinema, or just like the development of using, touchscreen devices, we're going to find that early on, there's a lot of mimicking of the real world. Remember, early cinema was basically just like filming, from one angle, like here's a play. There were no cuts or wide shots or close-ups. And early like apps on a phone, they were just websites. It was like you click on the app and it just takes you to the website. And then both of those are languages separated by about 100 years that started to figure out as time went on, oh, well, here's some ways we can really take advantage of the affordances of this medium and move away from the familiar and do something totally new. So I think we're already seeing more and more of that in virtual and augmented reality, but it's only going to expand as this technology becomes more ubiquitous.
And before we talk about your play, the play you work on, the big jump into the real-time tech is something amazing, from virtual production to live theater play online. For me, it's one of the big things to explore next. What's your view on that? I don't know, on this, just this tech of real time.
Yeah. I'm so glad you bring up the term virtual production, because that's become such a buzzword for like film and television and even video games to a certain extent. It's not a term that's been used a lot for live events yet. There's the occasional thing here and there, but what's been really exciting to me for, let's say, the past couple of years working in Unreal Engine, and I think this is going to become the case more with Unity now that they've bought Weta, which is such a remarkable acquisition, that you can start to use these tools that are made for one industry, like virtual production. It was first and foremost created for the film industry, and start to repurpose them for VR, AR, live events, some of these other things. So the work I'm involved with right now is cherry picking a lot of different techniques and stagecraft and elements that were not created for to be live or to be in theater. They're made for like, we're getting this thing, but then we're continuing to work on it and process it over the next few weeks. And then we release a final standalone result. And we're trying to figure out like, oh, no, but how do we do this live? How do we make this totally real time, have no cleanup, have no post-processing, and get the most we can out of the moment where the thing is actually being captured? So that's been really fun.
Yeah. Did you see Dream from the Royal Shakespeare Company? What did you think of it?
I loved it. Yeah. Sarah Ellis over at the RSC is a good friend. And when I was in London last week, I hung out with Matt Peel, who was also on that team. And I thought they did such a lovely job of finding ways to take motion capture technology, broadcast that live. I mean, the only frustration was, I wanted to be in virtual reality during that because it was such a beautiful world they created. And sometimes I saw the show 5 different times with my kids. My kids love virtual theater, VR theater. They've gone to stuff in the Under Presents and Tempest and Welcome to Respite and Tinker and all these wonderful shows. And we just kept talking every time we watched Dream. They're like, well, but I want to go hang out with Mustard Seed, and because it was a little bit more cinematic of a live show experience, you were constrained there. So we're taking a lot of inspiration from what we really loved about Dream for this production we have going on now, but it's with that freedom of movement and that agency to be wherever you want during the show. So if you want to watch Scrooge, you can be 2 inches away from Scrooge. If you want to go explore the environment over there, by all means have at it. And just to let you like have that freedom of what the medium of virtual reality really lets you do in ways that the real world can't. In the real world, if you're even in an immersive theater show, there's certain places you'd be where it would be like a fire hazard, or you'd be disrupting the angle of what everyone else is seeing, or you can't fly in the real world, you can in VR. So it's really fun to find those places where we can deviate what an IRL experience would be like versus an IVR experience.
So A Christmas Carol is next. You said it will be online next week.
Yeah.
What day exactly?
So let me give a little bit of background here too. So because we've mostly been talking about architecture with just a little sprinkling of my theater background, but I've always been excited about how technology can help theater. I wrote a play in high school that was like a 45-minute quasi musical with like 100 set changes. Nice. And we were using projection mapping, just using like the old like Epson school projectors. And like I just wanted to figure out how we could milk the technology we had at our disposal in the most meaningful way possible. And then in college, I co-founded a theater group called the Warehouse Architecture Theater, which is still at Syracuse. And then when I went from using virtual reality to design theaters, that was the original idea. But then we started working with companies like Lincoln Center and the Park Avenue Armory that were like, well, we're already a built theater, but there must be some ways that this technology can be used to help us pre-visualize the shows that we have coming up. It was fun to watch. There's an American show called Succession where last week there was a big birthday party in a place called The Shed in Hudson Yards. And that was a very early project where I got to use VR to start to visualize not only the architecture, but what certain shows in that event space might actually be like. So that was really cool to start thinking about VR that way. But then by 2018, I was having a chat with Philip Rosedale because we were both speaking at a conference in Boston about the potential of VR live events. And this was when High Fidelity, his follow-up to Second Life, was a VR platform. Now it's a spatial audio platform, but we were discussing what the potential is of live virtual reality events. And so he asked me if I could assemble a coalition of New York City-based theater makers and start to explore what works and what doesn't in virtual reality performance. So he was a wonderful client. We loved working with High Fidelity for a couple years, studying different kinds of genre, different kinds of avatars. Some of the people I was working with was David Gotchfeld, Kevin Leibson, Kira Benzing, and then all of our friends. That team just grew and grew and grew. And we learned so many lessons about, the audience performer dynamic and what things worked and what didn't. And then over the past couple years since then, I've been involved with live virtual reality theater shows that were in Mozilla Hubs and VR Chat and AltSpace, and even exploring Rec Room to a certain degree. But these are all social VR platforms, and they are not tailored toward putting on live events. At the other end of the spectrum, you have things happening in like Wave XR, Fortnite, where these are beautifully produced custom productions, often with like multi-million-dollar budgets, and those are unattainable to a certain degree. Like anyone who's like, I really like to put on theater shows, they can't do that. They can't just open up Fortnite or a Wave XR app and put on a big live show like that. So this new platform, which we're calling Heavenue, because it is on the cloud and it is a venue, is intended to be somewhere in the middle there, where it is a performance platform that is geared towards all scales of budget and resources and technology, and is trying to make it as easy as possible to put on a really compelling show that anyone around the world can see on really any internet connected device. So the way we're doing that, because I didn't want to say like, well, a lot of people have Oculus Quests, so we need to target the Quest level of hardware. We need to be like VR Chat and say like the maximum world size is 50 megabytes, although they did just increase that to 100 megabytes. But like, we're using Unreal Engine and we're using cloud computers, and we have beard textures in our project that are more than 100 megabytes. The world that we're operating in for Christmas Carol is I think about 100 million polygons when you kind of put everything together. So that's only possible because using cloud computing, we're allowing everyone to access computers on the internet that are 100 times more powerful than what their standalone device can do. But they can access it with their standalone device because all they need is a strong enough internet connection to send that signal back and forth. We recommend about 50 Mbps. And as they move their head and they press inputs on their controllers, they're just getting that lightning fast signal in return of, oh, I want to fly over here now. Oh, I want to go over here. I want to turn my head this way. And then they're getting to see an experience that most of our audience, I'm sure, will never have experienced in Quest, especially if they don't have a beefy desktop VR computer, because we're broadcasting something that is so beyond the capabilities of what that mobile chipset can handle.
It's nice. I do hope to see it. What about the choice of the story?
Yeah, so a little background on this particular pilot production. So I curate XR content for a conference called TCG, which stands for Theater Communications Group. They're the largest gathering of theater professionals in North America. And a couple years ago, I ran into some lovely folks from a prestigious group called Actors Theater out of Louisville, and stayed in touch with them. They were really excited about the VR and AR. We were showing them Magic Leap stuff and all these different ways we were playing with how technology could help theater. And they were excited about it, but they didn't know how to use it yet. And so coincidentally, we only started developing Heavenue in earnest about 5 months ago, but they reached out a couple months ago and were like, hey, we really like to do this annual production of Christmas Carol. Is there any way that we could do that in a virtual way that will expand to more people? And I said, well, yeah, actually, we're working on a platform right now, and this could be a great test case for it. So Robert Barry Fleming, the director, has this wonderful vision of reinterpreting this version of Christmas Carol, which is kind of a Charles Dickens recital where he's playing many characters and speaking to the audience and interacting with the ghosts, for it to be this take on Scrooge dealing with otherness. And I'd love to, let him speak more about his vision, but the result is this show that is really looking at the story from a new angle and is taking advantage of this medium really well, because we have these ghosts that are terrifying, these environments that you could never build in the real world. And we have Ari Tar, this incredibly talented actor who I've known about for years, He refers to himself as a ractor, which is the term from Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age. And so we have him performing live as Scrooge and many other characters using an Accent suit. Thank you, Accents, for letting us use your suit and gloves for our show. A facial capture helmet, which was generously donated by ILM and Epic Games, but he's just using, his iPhone there. And then we're broadcasting all this detail of Ari's performance live into VR so everyone can see it. And if you're really fascinated by all the muscles in his face and all the little nuanced twitches and all that, if you want to, you can get very close to it. And that's really exciting. It's been so fun to be in rehearsals over the past few weeks and have that freedom of not only me, but also letting Robert, our director, get very, very close to that performance and be able to make judgments about what is working and what isn't in a way that is both natural to him as a theater director, but also very uniquely taking advantage of what you can only do in a virtual environment like this.
Nice. Maybe we will speak with the creative team another time. Just don't want to spoil too much details about the play, but it's quite interesting. So about Avenue, it aims to broadcast plays all year long. Are you going to work on a few projects, or is it going to be a virtual world with theater people?
A virtual world with theater people. We're also targeting music as well. One of my co-founders, Or Wackman, has been very highly involved in big Rolling Stone and concert events around the world. So I'm kind of the theater guy, and he's more of the live music guy. But our goal, so Agile Lens, my XR studio I've been running for the past 5 years, has always been very much like a made-to-order custom content studio. With Avenue, we're trying to move away from that. Like right now, for a couple early productions, we're holding the hands of our partners a little bit because we want them to understand how to use these tools. But they're also educating us because we're figuring out, what are the best queuing tools that they need? What abilities do they want for things like muting the audience and turning the audience's mic on and setting up a lobby? But our goal is to be able to just create a set of tools and a platform entirely on the cloud, where we then can just say, hey, this is out in the wild now, and no one needs to talk to us. Some very talented theater student in the middle of nowhere who wants to put on a show can just go to heavenu.io and pull up a template and say, like, I want to be in this outdoor amphitheater and I want to put on an acoustic guitar concert, whatever. And then they can choose, like, well, here's the performance capture equipment I have available. I don't have an Accent suit, but I have a webcam. Great. We'll actually capture some of your motion that way and put that on a metahuman or an avatar or whatever, and just start to set up a bit of a wizard for helping people put on a compelling show in as intuitive a way as possible. So the ultimate goal is that I can just sit back and watch like our little Twitch for the metaverse pop up and see what creators are doing and have nothing to do with what some really talented people are doing from conception to completion of their show.
Cool. Thank you very much, Alex. I think we will talk again when you will relax and watch people work on your software. Thank you again, and we'll speak again about the project.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, and for anyone who wants to reach out, I'm at iBrews on Twitter, IBREWS. That's also my YouTube channel. And Christmas Carol, Scrooge's Ghost Encounter, in collaboration with Actors Theater of Louisville, is December 15th and 18th. There's 2 shows each day. Just go to my Twitter profile and you can click a link there and join us. We'd love to see you.
Yeah, we'll share about that on XR Most social. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew. Bye-bye.